In our series on Overwhelmed by the Gospel, we are today looking at being overwhelmed by freedom. And I want to look at the relationship between truth and freedom, and then freedom and love. In John 8, Jesus says that once we know the truth will set us free. This pairing of truth and freedom can be found at the very start of the biblical story. A lot of people look at the story of Adam and Eve and focus on their inherent sinfulness and the sinful human nature. But my takeaway from the story, my main takeaway, is a bit different to that. To me, that story says that human beings get on all right until somebody lies to them. They're enjoying the freedom with each other in creation and with God, and then something enters the environment and gives a distorted picture of life. And this alters their ideas, which in turn influences their values, which leads to the very first act of excessive consumption, which harms relationships with each other, with their environment, and with God. Their overconsumption leads to them no longer being able to live where they were, and they have to migrate to a different place. I'm not really going to have to think about how this could be relevant to the modern world. So if the cause of our unfreedom is a lie, what's the solution? Well, the solution is the truth, as Jesus said. Once you know the truth will set you free. A lot of Jesus' ministry involves him responding to distorted ideas or outright lies with greater truth. The Pharisees say, Moses said we could cast our wives aside if we write up a certificate. And Jesus says, well, God has something much more faithful and committed in mind. The Pharisees say, Moses said we could stone this woman because we caught her in adultery. Jesus says, yeah, stones are definitely the solution here. No, he doesn't. He says that such self-righteousness is premised on lying to ourselves about sin and scapegoating others for failures that rest on all of us. The Pharisees think that it's a sin to heal on the Sabbath. Jesus thinks that healing and giving life are wonderful things to do on the Sabbath. You notice how in all of these examples, the truest statement is also the one that is most life-giving, most loving, relational and compassionate. Truth and freedom and love should all be mutually validating. So when we seek to grow in freedom, a good place to start is to highlight lies that surround us and to call them out as such, proclaiming a truer picture as much as our capacities allow. And what's truer should be what is more loving and freeing and compassionate. This is the sort of practice that I think Paul might be getting at when he writes in 2 Corinthians, where he says that we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. It's phrased in a bull in a china shop type of way that Paul tends to phrase things, but the development of such a critical mindset is, I think, so important. When you walk out of your front door and see the streets and walls of Manchester plastered in adverts, all willing to proclaim any lie at all as long as it gets you to buy stuff. When the popular media is a voice box for a political and economic establishment that is completely uninterested in either the truth or your freedom. And when the cost of these lies are slavery and suffering and destruction, when all of this is the case, it becomes clear why we need to exercise our critical faculties. Those who hoard wealth and power in this world have a vested interest in subjugation and slavery and lies. And it is a matter of spiritual and intellectual self-defense to be anticipating manipulation. When the government says that we should sell weapons to human rights abusing nations because it's good for the UK economy, we should take that thought captive and evaluate it by the spirit of love, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. When they say that we should indefinitely detain in prisons the poor migrant in our country, we should take that thought captive and analyse it by the Spirit of God. To see any voice or institution as being above such an evaluation is a kind of idolatry. and we all fall prey to it. But every time we do this, every time we identify a lie and proclaim a truth, we grow in freedom. Once we know the truth, we don't settle for what the lie said was freedom. And the evidence for that fact is reverberating around the world right now. From Bolivia to Sudan, Thailand to the US, Hong Kong to Rojava, across Eastern Europe to the UK, and on, people are calling out the lies and persecution, proclaiming truth and freedom, and then hitting the streets to demand it. Today, as I record this, Myanmar is engaged in a conflict between the state and the people, in which only one side has weapons. But the people are on the street making their demands all the same. That might seem like a bit of a paradox. When people are dying and being put in prison, how do we make sense of that? They want more freedom, and so they do something which they might know will result in them losing even the level of freedom they already had. My own sense is that our desire for freedom is grounded in love. And love is ultimately more concerned for others than ourselves. People rightly want more freedom for themselves, and so it drives them to do something that costs them. Why? Because they are driven by a love which says that if this is important for me, it's also important for her, and for him, and for us. It's only a paradox when we believe the lie that people who are truly free will live for themselves alone. It's only a paradox if we don't think that the very act of resistance is a proclamation of the freedom we already possess. To live in keeping with a kingdom of God that is better than the kingdom they find themselves in. But those who are freed from lies and reminded of the truth know themselves to be beings who live for others, even at cost to themselves. I know people have found COVID a particularly difficult time. But time and time again, we see that such moments as this provide the opportunity for massive transformation. Now is the time to call into question all of the claims that dominate our environment, which tells us that what we need in response to COVID is more of the very policies, practices, and systems that are destroying our world. Even in our little church, we can do better than that. We know greater truths. We can imagine greater freedom, and we can live for it. In the discussions now, we're going to get a far fuller picture of gospel freedom than we could ever get from just one voice. Only by hearing from each other will we expand our understanding of how freeing the gospel is. So in the next discussion, let's share how the gospel has given you freedom, what freedom you believe it can bring to others, and what lies we are aware of that need to be replaced with truth. Amen.